For instance, that first stage of entering the dark wood, there's a marvelous poem by David Wagoner, as the chair of poetry at the University of Washington, with a poem called Lost. And it's a teaching story from the Northwest Indian teaching tradition. It was a story that would be told to a young boy or girl that would ask the question, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? See, this was a life or death question in the climax cedar forests of the Northwest. 150 foot high. You walk into them just 100 yards, you can't see any of the 4 cardinal directions. So you need to know how you know where you are. Well, but this is an equally true question for a middle manager in an organization, in a large organization, or for a street kid in Philadelphia. What do I do when I'm lost in the city? What do I do when I'm lost in the organization? Here's the answer that the elder gives. You can feel from this how precise the teaching is. You know, we often feel we're not going to go into these areas of the psyche because it's all wet and woolly in there, and besides you need to hold the hand of a trained psychologist or because of lawsuits, whatever. But actually poetry shows how incredibly precise it is in there, and that there's an equally clear bottom line, but the rules are very different. And the rules are much more movable, and the whole world is much more dynamic. And this is what the elder is telling to this young boy or girl who asks the question, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? The elder says, stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Stand still. What do I do when I'm lost in the forest? Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. Listen, the forest breathes. It whispers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. The forest knows where you are. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. You must let it find you. See, what's astonishing about that poem is you can say there are 3 things in this poem, you see, that are absolutely clear. First of all, the elder says, you cannot sleepwalk your way into your destiny. You must wake up and pay attention. Stand still. You know, the trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. You must pay attention. That means paying attention to the shadows of your existence too. You must pay attention to everything you've given away in order to make yourself safe in your position at work. All the games you play in order to remain safe and untouched, as well as your creative gifts too. You must pay attention to those also. Second stage is that in this teaching from the elder is this incredible feeling of silence. That unless you have this silence in your life, and you feel the silence in the poem, where he says, if you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. You feel the silence there? You're almost under that cedar canopy there. And I think what the elder is saying there is that if you pay real attention, unless you have silence, an ability for silence in your body to do that, then you will get too frightened, because all the voices inside you will drown out any real change. You have 100 reasons not to make any real change, you see. And you've got all the voices and all the reasons not to do it. And so the ability for profound silence is being called on here. And then that attention can flower into something else. Because you really don't know what your grief is. If you do feel grief about your workplace, you really don't know what's underneath that grief until you fall into it.
The poem seems to be attempting to awaken a kind of intuitive sense.
That's right. And then this amazing last line, the forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. This is astonishing because, you know, in the Zen tradition they say, if you go out and confirm the 10,000 things, this is delusion. If you go out and confirm the 10,000 things, this is delusion. If the 10,000 things come and confirm you, this is enlightenment. See, the Salish elders in the Northwest were saying the same thing. The forest knows where you are, you must let it find you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Greg Lourey, and on behalf of myself and my fellow directors at the Leadership Circle Asia Pacific, I want to welcome you to our conference for 2013. Before we begin, I just want to recognise the stewards of the land we're standing on, who are the Cadigal people. As we thought about this conference, as we do each year, we always want to have conversations that are a bit edgy. That's our intention. We want to be at the edge of this conversation about leadership, because leadership as a word can be a bit tired and a bit overdone. So what's an edgy conversation? What's a conversation at the edge that we'd like to have? And that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years. So that's our intention again today. Hence the topic of our conference this year, which is the alchemy of leadership, the art and science of demystifying transformation. So I want to start into that conversation. That poem by David White, or that excerpt by David White, what he's saying in there, what that clip is about, was the beginnings of this journey of transformation. So what are the beginnings of this journey? And the beginning of the journey is to stand still. Because when you're lost, all the old ways of working no longer work anymore. All the things that I knew how to do, how to be, all the skills that I've acquired are no longer serving me as they used to, and I don't know what to do. That's the magic moment when you're lost, that something is about to transform. And that's a tough place to be, particularly in organisations. And so there's some really interesting things there. You're not, when you're standing still, you're not an active participant, you're an active participant in that process. And some of the things David was saying there was, firstly, you need to pay attention. You can't sleepwalk your way into your destiny. So you're actively in attention to this space. The second thing is you have to pay attention to the shadows, the things that keep you safe, the place that you want to go where you feel okay. That's the comfort zone that we often get into in organisations. The third thing is to try and shut out the thousands of voices that are running around in your head telling you what to do, to get busy, to fix it, to attend to the problem. And so this idea of standing still, which I might have to do if the mic keeps rubbing, is to shut out those voices long enough to be able to hear yourself. Because if you're feeling grief in your workplace, you've got to move into the grief. Get to know it. Treat it as a powerful stranger. Some really powerful words in there. So we wanted to start with that little piece because it's about what are the beginnings of the journey of transformation, what do they feel like, what do they look like? And that captures it really nicely. Bob Anderson stood on this stage about 3 years ago and he talked about the word consciousness. And he said at the time, consciousness is a fuzzy word when we talk about it in an organisation. It's not really an organisationally relevant word. It doesn't feel organisationally relevant. So how do we make it an organisationally relevant word? And he reframed it as the operating system of performance. The operating system, using this IT analogy. Now here I stand, a wonderful piece of hardware. And then I walk through my life and I acquire all this software. I learn to talk and I learn to walk and I learn to ride a bike and I learn to play tennis or play golf and captain a team and get an education and get a degree, and I accumulate all this wonderful software. But somewhere between the software I've accumulated and this piece of hardware, I need an operating system so the two will talk to each other. And on that journey, while acquiring that, I'm actually developing that operating system, that capacity to deal with greater complexity. And this is what the Leadership Circle was designed to do. It says we're living into a world of global escalating complexity. So how do we attend to the operating system of the leader to help them to meet the complexity they're living into? This is what the Leadership Circle was designed to do. And this global complexity is just getting greater and greater. And the clicker's not going to work. And so the idea is we're trying to build the operating system of the leaders, of their leadership capability to meet the complexity that they're moving into. So this, as we've had this conversation about consciousness and how does consciousness show up in business relevant language, we want to do the same thing today with the word transformation. How do we make the word transformation an organisationally relevant word? And what I mean by organisationally relevant is, are the leaders in organisations, or those who are making investment decisions, willing to invest in this as well? Just as they invest in skills acquisition and education and training, to provide the argument as to why this is also a valuable thing to be investing in for your leaders in your organisations. So that's the intention. So we started off 3 years ago. This is like one continuous conversation. So we started 3 years ago having this conversation about what's the leadership circle, what's consciousness, what's the operating system. We then stepped into last year and said, well, what's the next edge that we want to move into? And the next edge was, how do you access this right brain, bypass the left brain, join the two? How do you access this deeper wisdom? So our conference last year was about the wisdom at work. What does wisdom look like? So if you hold that wisdom is just a collection of moments of insight I gain over time. Wisdom is insights gained over time. Then we're all living a lifetime where we're gaining moments of insight. And so last year's conference was Wisdom at Work, and we used the power of poetry to do that. So to enter the conference today was to use some more poetry. Start stimulating this part of you that brings insight to tap into your own deeper wisdom. And so we're moving to the third part of this conversation. So what does this transformation process look like? How do I know when it's happening? What are the signals? And when I'm in it, what do I do with it? You'll have some speakers today talking about just the fact that something reveals itself to me doesn't mean I know what to do with it. This is the question. If it is revealed to me, what do I do with it? So this is where I want to dive into the stream, this word transformation. And what do I mean by what are we transforming into? It's one I know, again, here's a fuzzy word. For the purposes of this conversation, what we're trying to attend to is the transformation of leaders into extraordinary leaders. How do we transform into an extraordinary leader? And why would you want to do that? Because extraordinary leaders are extraordinarily effective and they have significant impacts on their organisational outcomes. So for transformation, for the purpose of this conversation, is transforming into extraordinary leadership. So I appreciate we've got a mix of the audience in here today. Some who are very familiar with the leadership circle, others who are not. So I'm not going to go through and explain all about the leadership circle, but I'm going to try and do a balance between giving you enough so that I can move into what I really want to talk about. So I'll start there. So the leadership circle as a platform, as a framework, has 4 key pillars. The first pillar is that it measures leadership competencies. The top half of the circle is a competency framework. Based on 25 years of research around what are those competencies that leaders can step into that have the highest correlation to leadership effectiveness. So the top half of the model, of the framework, says what are those competencies? The bottom half of the framework says what are those assumptions and beliefs that I carry around with me? What are those assumptions that I make that get in the way of truly stepping into those competencies? And this is part of the magic of the framework. That tension between what do I want to create for myself and what are the stories I tell myself about that get in the way of that. So here's this tension. I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but this is an important dynamic in this framework, this dynamic of creative tension. And then we have 2 other pillars. Adult stage development and the fact that this is an integrated framework. All these pieces come together in a rather elegant whole. The adult stage development work has been around now for 10 to 15 years. It's been evolving, but it's really about this operating system concept. So these stages that we can grow through, these developmental stages of the operating system getting bigger. It's the next version of the software, right? It allows us to use all that software more elegantly. Have it open up more screens at the one time and still be able to use them, not have the thing shut down on me. You know, the speed with which it operates. Because what it's saying is that this operating system gets bigger, I'm able to handle more complexity, more polarities, and I can meet the complexities of the environments I'm living into. This is a very shorthand version of what this is, but essentially it's getting at the operating system of the individual, the meaning-making, the sense-making capacity of the individual to perceive their environment, to interpret their environment gets bigger. Hence the reason you can handle more complexity. I'm not saying it gets easier. That would be a mistake. It doesn't get easier. You just have the capacity to handle it better. And why does this even matter? Well, why it matters. Jump the screen. It's not going to love me, is it? Can you bring that slide up for me, David? It's not going to love me. Doesn't matter. I'll just tell you what I was going to say without the picture. Why does this matter? Why this matters is because as you move through these stages, the impact that as a leader's operating system grows, their leadership effectiveness grows exponentially. So as you move through some of these stages, here's the Keegan model, reactive to creative to integral. The impact you have on your organisation is exponential. It's not linear. And so this is the business case. This is why you do this. This is why transformation should be an organisationally relevant conversation to have. And finally, I said it's an integrated framework. Integrated because it takes the research science, the psychology, the philosophy, the ancient wisdom, and it brings it all together in a framework. I love this slide. So here's what underlies the platform. And that's the leadership circle. So if you haven't seen one, that's what one looks like. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of it, but that's what you would see. And that's what this model is doing. All those things I just mentioned. So now I'll really get to what I really want to talk about, which is this. I spend a lot of my time in this work talking about, yes, about the individuals, but I want to talk about the collective. I want to talk about the team. I want to talk about the organisation. How does all that I just mentioned play out in an organisation? How do we capture that? Well, it's one of the things that was created was how do we get some of that same data and look at the patterns, look at the things that are showing up so we get some kind of insight into what's the leadership culture of the organisation. And the Leadership Culture Survey was created for that purpose. In fact, it sort of came way late, if you like, into the conversation because it was developed after the work that Bob Anderson, the creator of the Leadership Circle, was doing for 30 years, then created a profile and bring all that together. But what this does elegantly is it allows you to enter a conversation in a much more gentle way, because sometimes leaders who have not had a lot of work in this space, it can be quite confronting to hear something directly about you. The easier way to enter the conversation in a more gentle way is to say, let's look at this team, let's look at this organisation and have a conversation about what's happening, what's showing up in the leadership of this team. What often happens then is the person sits there and says, well, I wonder what's my contribution to that? And in that place, this is the place we're getting to with what David White was talking about, is you start to get to the place of deep inquiry. You start to inquire. Start to stand still and ask questions of yourself. Well, what's my part in that? So the culture survey is a way to actually get the organisation to have a beginning conversation. We talk about the beginning of the journey of transformation. This is a way to have a beginning conversation about what's the leadership culture like in this organisation. And then for people to find their place and orient to it. And the central premise here is this idea of creative tension. The culture survey is designed around this idea of creative tension. What's the vision that I want for this organisation? What's the future I want it to live into? But what's current reality look like? And how much tension is in there in the system? Because there has to be enough tension in the system for the system to shift. If there's not enough excitement, there's a little bit of fear in that system, then there's no energy in it. And so what this particular frame is doing is saying, let's just see how much energy in the system is there for change. We talk a lot about we want things to be different. We collect some data and we say, well, actually, you're not really sure you want it as much as you say you do. And this is the lens that it gives you. It's really powerful. So the idea of creative tension is I have a vision of a different future. I have my current reality, and it keeps me safe. Same thing that David White was talking about. These inner stories that keep us safe, but the biggest story about I want something different for myself, for my organisation. So the culture survey is this cultural microscope on the team and the organisation. It really is. It really gets into, says, what's the culture of this organisation like? And it's a team-wide picture, however you want to group that team. The same theoretical platform we were talking about, and it focuses on this idea of creative tension. So this is what the culture survey is doing in getting a picture of the organisation. What's really interesting about it is it says, well, here's my vision, here's my goal for this organisation. We say, okay, there it is. And then it benchmarks it against the vision, the dreams of other organisations. And so it's like a stress test. We'll say, exactly how big is your vision? And you get to go, oh, really? Actually, it's probably not as big as I thought it was going to be, as others. So it's really a measure of how big is how much energy is in the system, really. That's a lovely, another elegant way to get into a conversation. So it provides that vision and desire, change, energy. It indicates where you need to place the conversation, because you can spend a lot of time trying to find a handle for that cup, right? Where do we start this conversation? It is a cup with no handle, right? Lots of stuff in it, but where do I grab it? And so this actually will pinpoint some of the places where they think there's enough energy for that conversation, for that transformational process to begin. Really powerful. So it helps direct the teams to where they think the most critical conversation is. So there's a compelling rationale for change in this. It gives you a compelling rationale for why things will want to be different. It focuses on leadership development efforts and the context of the leaders. I can't say enough. I don't know how many conversations I've been in with leaders about, well, what's the context? I hear the facts, but I don't get the context. And context is everything. When you talk about operating systems that evolve and meaning-making systems, firstly you want to know the context, because if I move into every situation with exactly the same meaning-making, but I don't take into account, well, what's the context? How do I need to orient myself to the situation? Very important. It delineates cultural challenges associated with a lot of business transactions, mergers, acquisitions, bringing teams together. Spent a lifetime doing that, I can tell you this. I wish I'd have had this 20 years ago. And finally, it really does correlate leadership effectiveness to all these sort of bottom line metrics. That's this idea about the exponential impact of a leader's operating system on their effectiveness and then on their organisation. But what's all this got to do with the alchemy of leadership? Well, firstly, and that's why we started with the David White clip, that invites questions into these underlying assumptions, into the organisational dilemmas we have. We have to start to ask bigger questions. If we are in our environments trying to solve technical problems, because that's our interpretation of what's in front of us, rather than actually what we've got as an adaptive challenge, one that says you can't solve it from the way you know how to solve things, then you're just going to get really busy and really tired and not really going to go anywhere. So this act of deeply questioning starts to reveal things to us that were previously hidden. This is part of the magic. Part of the science and the magic of transformation is nothing gets created from nothing. Normally I'm just hiding something from you and I'll reveal it to you when I'm ready for you to see it. We do that in our lives, in our organisations, in our conversations, because I don't reveal things till I feel safe enough to let you see them. And this whole transformative process is about awareness, the conversation we've been having for the last couple of years. Cultivating the quality of our presence, the quality of our attention. In this place where you stand still, are you really paying attention? You are there as an active participant. It's not just happening to you. You have to move toward it. And so this is the mastery piece. This is the mastery is this key to transformation, to have that practice, to cultivate these practices. So that's the conversation we're here to have today.